This weekend, LSU is hosting arguably its most dynamic recruiting target ever. I have everything you need to know about him on today's episode of Locked on LSU. Let's get it.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I am your host, Matt Moscona. Glad to have you aboard with us here. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. We are free, available wherever you get great podcasts, so please subscribe. And thank you for watching on YouTube as well. Subscribe, smash the like button, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a video. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone all day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Jonah Williams is a name that recruiting fans and followers know. But he may very well be the most dynamic athlete that LSU has ever recruited. I am not into hyperbole. I'm not the guy that's going to tell you what you want to hear and make really bold proclamations. Oh, I'll be honest, and sometimes I'll be loud, and a lot of you know that about me. But I'm also not the guy that follows recruiting 24/7, 365. There's a lot of guys and ladies who do that exceptionally well. But today we're going to do something on this episode that's a bit different, admittedly. I don't know there's going to be many times where we spend almost an entire show on one topic except for a post-game type reaction show. But this warrants it because I feel like over the next 12 months, we are all going to get well acquainted with the name Jonah Williams. Now, the name may sound familiar because there was an offensive lineman from Alabama who now plays in the NFL named Jonah Williams, but this is not him. This is Jonah Williams out of Galveston, Ball High School in Galveston. And Jonah Williams is the number one safety in America for the class of 2025. Keep in mind, LSU already has 3 players committed right now that are number one in the country at their position. Of course, Bryce Underwood, the number one quarterback, Harlem Berry, the number one running back, DJ Pickett, the number one cornerback. And actually, we can go even further because Karis Kern is a guy that some scouting services have as the number one interior offensive lineman in the country. So LSU's crushing it right now in recruiting. But Jonah Williams, for a multitude of reasons, would take that to an even different level. And I'm going to get to that. But let me start by telling you about Jonah Williams, the football prospect. He's 6'3", 206. Keep in mind, this is a guy that's entering his senior season. 6'3" 2/4, if we're being exact, because they're pretty exact when they go to these elite camps. He's the number 10 overall prospect in the country, the number one safety in the country, and the number 3 player in the state of Texas. And he's not just the number one safety by one service. On 3, 24/7, ESPN, Rivals, all rank Jonah Williams as the best safety in America. Why not? He was the district MVP in football as a sophomore. I mean, the numbers themselves, both as a defensive back and as a receiver, are outrageous. And again, he's just entering his senior year. He's got everybody after him. He's been recruited by Oregon and Texas A&M and Oklahoma and Texas and now LSU. As a matter of fact, he took an official visit to LSU back in June. And this is really significant because Jonah Williams is coming back to LSU this weekend. This weekend, LSU's having a really significant recruiting event called the Bayou Splash. And you typically end up getting commits and big-time prospects out of these types of recruiting events. And LSU's done exceptionally well. You know, the Boys from the Boot weekend that they've done in the past, and the Bayou Splash is now another. And what's so interesting is if you look at Jonah Williams' Twitter, he has long been thought to be probably an Oregon lean. And when Phil Knight made that. Well, let me not say Phil Knight. It was, it was one of the. It was Rick Neuheisel who was relaying something he had heard through the grapevine at Oregon that Phil Knight was willing to give unlimited NIL. And one of the things that caught a lot of people's attention is that Jonah Williams, in reply to that, tweeted that he can't be bought, that money isn't going to be the reason that he makes his decision wherever that's going to be. I think it's also worth noting that Jonah Williams comes from a good family, really good family. His dad is a judge in the Galveston area. His brother, by the way, is a Major League Baseball player. More on that in just a little bit as well. And there was an On3 video from Jamie Newberg. And the tweet read, LSU looking to burst Oregon's RPM bubble once again. This time for number one safety, Jonah Williams. Can the Tigers pull it off? And Jonah Williams retweeted that tweet. I'm not trying to read in too much to this, but it's pretty clear this is a young guy with a lot of great options. LSU is among them. He's visiting Texas this week and then leaving Austin and coming to Baton Rouge for the Bayou Splash this weekend. So, by the way, I also should mention that when DJ Pickett announced his commitment to LSU, Jonah Williams quote tweeted it with the eye emoji. Again, I'm not trying to make too big of a deal out of what a 17-year-old is tweeting, but you look for things in these circles. You look for hints, for Easter eggs dropped along the way. And then there's the safety position. When you look at LSU at safety for 2025, look, let's just look at this year, of course. Sage Ryan and Jordan Gilbert were running at the ones in spring. You know, Austin Osbury transferred in from Auburn. You've got rising sophomores in Jordan Allen and Kylan Jackson. And then you got the incoming freshmen, Juwan Johnson, Deshaun Spears, Joel Rogers. So the Tigers have good numbers there at safety. That's 8 safeties, and that doesn't even include Major Burns, who is listed as a safety, but in Blake Baker's defense is playing that star position. And that may be where it's more interesting, because you look at that group of players I just mentioned. The only one after this season that's going to be out of eligibility is Sage Ryan, meaning Gilbert and Osbury and Allen and Jackson and Johnson and Spears and Rogers could all come back. But Jonah Williams is more likely to play that star position. And if Major Burns plays that spot in 2024, that spot is vacated in 2025, and it would suit a freakish athlete, maybe the number one player in the country at his position. It would suit that player perfectly, and that player might just be Jonah Williams. Now, you've listened to me now for 8 minutes, and you might be thinking, Matt, I don't understand. You said this was the most dynamic, arguably the most dynamic athlete that LSU's ever recruited. He sounds like a great safety and a really good player, but LSU's had plenty of those. Eric Reed was a 5-star. Jamal Adams was a 5-star, became a top 10 pick in the draft. Laron Landry came in and was a 4-year starter and was the number 6 overall pick. We've seen great safeties at LSU. So Chad Jones, 2-sport guy. Why is he arguably the most dynamic athlete that LSU's ever recruited? I'm glad you asked. I'm going to tell you why in just a moment. Love telling you every single day here about our friends at FanDuel, of course, because I love sports. Love them so much, and I never want sports to stop. As a matter of fact, I'm really fired up because the Olympics are about to get underway, so we can watch more sports. We can bet on them, too. But as the playoffs wind down, as they are wont to do, we get fewer games. The sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. And all I have to do is open the app, dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel and start making the most out of your summer. I'm looking at the odds right now. There's Dinger Tuesdays. Of course, if it's a Tuesday and you want to bet on home runs, you can do that. Of course, there's same-game parlays with a 30% profit boost for Major League Baseball. Check it out and get all the info right there. Of course, you refer a friend, give 50, get 50. It's all there for you. Check it out at FanDuel. always, always, always take advantage of those boosts and bonus. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, an official sports betting partner here of Locked On LSU. Okay, I've buried the lead enough. Jonah Williams, by now you understand, is a really, really good football player. A really good football player. Number one player in the country at his position. But Jonah Williams might be an even better baseball player. And that's the crux of the issue at hand. I was talking to a scout on Monday about Jonah Williams. When we found out that Jonah Williams was coming to Baton Rouge for the Bayou Splash, one of my buddies who is a scout for a National League team called me, and I said, I mean, what's the deal with Jonah Williams as a baseball player, as a baseball prospect? And this longtime scout, when I say a longtime scout, I mean a longtime scout, told me he's a bigger version of Deion Sanders. Okay, you have my attention. And before you roll your eyes, the only thing I can ask you is this. You listen to this show, you watch this show. Do you believe I'm talking to legitimate people who have good information? I'm telling you, this is a Major League Baseball scout who has scouted for a long time and told me he is a bigger version of Deion Sanders. He runs like the wind. He can hit with power, plays a dynamic center field. He's a five-tool guy. He said he has tools like Connor Griffin. Connor Griffin, the LSU signee, who was just the 9th pick of the draft. Connor Griffin. One major difference, Jonah Williams throws and bats from the left side. So that's another dynamic. He's not just another power right-handed bat. He's power from the left side. How good is Jonah Williams at the plate? As a high school sophomore, he hit .474 as a sophomore. And did I mention, not only can he play center field and hit with power, but he also pitches and has already topped out at 94 miles per hour from the left side. So not only are we talking about a 6'3", 206-pound safety that's the number one safety in America, but he's also a guy that in 2025 projects to be a top half of round one guy like Connor Griffin. Took his official visit to LSU in June, I mentioned. But he didn't just visit with Brian Kelly and Jake Olson and Blake Baker and the football staff. He met his way over to Gurrier, to the box, to visit with Jay Johnson as well. You see, if LSU has one distinct and sincere advantage over every other school that is recruiting Jonah Williams, it's Jay Johnson. And not just because Jay Johnson is the best recruiter in college baseball. Jay Johnson is also the first coach that was recruiting Jonah Williams early in his high school career. So while Brian Kelly and the LSU football program would be desperate to get a player like Jonah Williams on campus, the number one safety in the country, as LSU is trying to remake its defense, and in particular, its secondary, the vaunted DBU reputation that LSU's had for decades that over the last 3 years has been anything but, and mostly because you just don't have the Jimmies and the Joes. And you already added a guy like DJ Pickett and the number one corner. And now you have the possibility of adding the number one safety. Oh, Brian Kelly and Blake Baker and Jake Olson must be salivating at the notion of getting Jonah Williams on LSU's campus. But it might actually be Jay Johnson that seals the deal. We've seen two sport athletes at LSU in the past, guys that have made it work. Chad Jones won a national championship in football and in baseball. Spencer Ware gave it a go, tried to make it work. Jeremy Witten was a punter for the football team and an outfielder for the baseball team. Chris Jackson, not the basketball Chris Jackson, the baseball Chris Jackson, was an outfielder and a place kicker for the football team. We've seen guys in track and field, Benny Brazell, Trendon Holiday, football players that also ran track. Xavier Carter, That's not altogether uncommon. Finding position players in baseball that also become stars in football, that has been a bit more rare. But Jonah Williams may just do it. I really pressed some people today about Jonah Williams because, forgive me for being skeptical, but we just saw it with Connor Griffin. When you have a prospect in baseball that is that elite, that is a projected top half of round one guy coming out of high school, a guy that is staring down $5, $6, $7 million, boom, as an 18-year-old as soon as they're done high school, you just don't see guys pass on that. Oh, you see guys pass on seven figures. It happens. Seldom with guys that are in the top half of round one, like Jonah Williams figures to be. And as much as I pressed and as skeptical and cynical as I was, because I've just seen that movie play out so many times with these elite high school prospects, one thing that continued to come back to me was this is a young guy who doesn't necessarily need money. But then again, whether you need money or not, if someone's offering you $6 million at 18, you take it more often than not. But a guy that loves both sports and wants to play both sports in college. And when you're that elite at both of them, you got to figure the more you learn about yourself, one of them is going to shake out in a big way. Now, look, a couple of years ago, we saw Maurice Hampton try this. Mo Hampton was a safety who passed on a couple of $1 million out of high school as a baseball prospect because he wanted to come to LSU and play both. Battled injuries on the football field, never quite broke through in baseball, and it didn't work out. He ended up transferring. So seldom you see guys pass on that amount of money and have it still offered to them or waiting for them years later. Seldom does that happen. But we may just find out if that's the case with Jonah Williams. And he knows this process well. I mentioned his brother, Nick Williams, was drafted in the second round by the Texas Rangers, ended up playing 4 big league seasons, 3 with the Phillies, 1 with the White Sox. So he knows this draft world well through his brother. We're not going to get any resolution on this anytime soon. Jonah Williams has a senior season to play out and make a decision on the football field, which will also be tied in to baseball. And even if he does end up, let's say hypothetically, choosing LSU and showing up for spring of 2025, a few months after spring of 2025, the Major League Baseball draft is going to happen. And Jonah Williams is going to hear his name called, unless if he tells teams, don't draft me. We saw that with Zach Lee. Zach Lee was on LSU's campus going through fall camp. He was going to be an LSU quarterback. And then the Dodgers decided, we're just not taking no for an answer. So I don't want to throw a wet blanket on the whole conversation. I don't want you to be discouraged and think that it'll never happen. And by the way, LSU doesn't even have him committed yet. He's visiting Texas, who also has a pretty good baseball program. But Jim Schlossnagle at Texas, not 1/10 of the recruiter that Jay Johnson is. With respect to Nolan Cain, who is there. But LSU can offer something that no other program can. Lots of places can offer NIL. Lots of places can offer great football tradition, but none can offer the quality of football tradition and the quality of baseball tradition coinciding with the best baseball recruiter in the country who was the first one on Jonah Williams, like LSU can. So are you intrigued? You should be, because we're going to be hearing that name for about another 12 months. And what may happen with Jonah Williams, where he may land, if he'll be a 1-sport, 2-sport guy, or if he ends up signing a big old fat Major League Baseball contract in the draft next July. But get to know the name, Jonah Williams. Okay. I do have to talk a little bit about the 2025 LSU baseball roster because there was some movement. We'll wrap up with that as we continue. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Hey, as I mentioned, thank you as always for making us your first listen, but you can always search from a bevy of shows on the Locked On Podcast Network for your second listen. Maybe Locked On Big Ten, as Big Ten Media Day is going on, if you want the latest in a newly expanded 18-team Big Ten. Great time to find Locked On Big Ten. Search on your favorite podcast app. Hey, so I mentioned the 2025 LSU roster beginning to take shape. And 4 players that were drafted have agreed to their contracts. Fidel Ulloa, Luke Hayden, Christian Little, and Justin Lohr. Now, none of this should be surprising. As we've said often, if a player goes in the top 10 rounds, that's part of the draft slot pool, and they've already agreed to their signing bonus. Fidel Ulloa was a 7th-round pick of the Rockies. Slot value at pick 198 was $295,300. Fidel Ulloa signed for $295,300. He got exactly slot. Good for him. 1 round later, Luke Hayden, the transfer from Indiana State, was taken. Now, this is where the draft gets interesting, and this is a good teaching moment. So Luke Hayden signed for $197,500. Slot value at his pick was $217,400. So he actually took $20,000 less than slot to be taken in round 8. You might say, well, why would you do that? Because Luke Hayden knew, especially with all of the right-handed pitchers that LSU had signed in the portal, and then whenever the decision came from William Schmidt that he was going to show up on campus, that it was going to be harder to get innings. So you're Luke Hayden. You still had leverage, so he used it. He was drafted, and he took what they gave him, which was just $20,000 under slot. It's a good deal for Luke Hayden, so congrats to him, and good luck. In round 11, now keep in mind we were outside of the top 10 rounds. Teams can still oversign in this spot, and that's what happened with Christian Little. Keep in mind, I mentioned Luke Hayden in round 8 got $197,500. 3 rounds later, in round 11, Christian Little got $200,000. Christian Little got more in round 11 than Justin Lohr got in round 8. And that's a great deal for Christian Little. A senior sign with no leverage to go in round 11 and to have $50,000 count toward their bonus pool is massive respect for Christian Little and the prospect that he is. Look, at one point, was the number 1 right-hander coming out of high school, and came to campus. His college career clearly didn't work out the way thought it would. Again, another example of why guys who are going to get millions of dollars coming out of high school should take the millions of dollars coming out of high school, because very seldom is it ever there at that amount whenever it is time for you to hear your name called and to sign. But that's how it goes. By the way, I think I said Luke Hayden is the one who signed in round 8. Justin Lohr is the other prospect. Lohr was taken in round 13 by the Colorado Rockies, and he signed for $150,000. So congrats to Justin Lohr, a guy who had leverage there as a junior and heard his name called, got a 6-figure signing bonus, and he'll go on to pitch in the Rockies organization. So Ulloa, Hayden, Little, and Lohr all agreeing to their contracts and signing their contracts at their slot value. So LSU's roster starts to take shape for 2025. One of the things I know that we've talked about here is, does LSU pursue a catcher? It seems like they are done, and they might be a player too heavy as of this point, so you might see more attrition instead of more addition. So look, you got Blaze Priester, you got Cade Arambidi. Those are your top 2 catchers. One of the signees that you got out of the portal, maybe it's a Luis Hernandez. Maybe it's a Eddie Yaman, the big 6'5", former catcher who'd been playing third base in an emergency spot. Maybe one of those guys can squat behind the dish, but you hope good health for Priester and Arambidi, and they get you home in 2025. So, as I mentioned, a little bit of an unorthodox edition today of Locked on LSU, but I didn't intend to. It's very seldom that we're going to go so deep just on one player like we did with Jonah Williams, but I felt today it was worth taking the time to do it because he is a significant target in 2 sports, like program-altering target in 2 different sports for LSU. And the Tigers will have him on campus this weekend for the Bayou Splash. We'll see if Brian Kelly and Jay Johnson can make some headway. Okay, that'll do it for us here. Do us a favor, as always, Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever a video is posted. And be sure to tell a friend, let a friend know that they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.